Today's Maundy Thursday, the day in which our Lord institutes his supper in the upper room with his disciples. Now, as with all the other New Testament stories, to understand fully what's going on in the Lord's Supper, we need to look at it from the perspective of the Old Testament. Now, there are a number of Old Testament meals and stories which we could look at, which give us an understanding of what's happening in the supper. We could look at God giving the manna to the Israelites in the wilderness. We could look at the Passover meal. We could look at the bread of the presence in the tabernacle. All of those are important, but there's a couple of other Old Testament stories that I want to look at instead, because both of these stories are actually alluded to when Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. And these two stories are Exodus chapter 24 and Zechariah chapter 9. Now in Exodus 24, Israel is camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, and God is making his covenant with them. And there's a significant event that occurs at the foot of Mount Sinai. Sacrifices are offered, and then Moses takes the blood of these sacrifices and he splits it in two. Half of that blood he puts upon the altar, but it's what he does with the other half that is important. He takes this other half of the blood and he sprinkles it directly upon the people. The blood of the sacrifices, the blood of atonement, the blood of the covenant, he places upon Israel. And he says when he does this, that this is the blood of the covenant that God is making with Israel. Now that particular phrase, blood of the covenant, in Hebrew, when translated into Greek in the Septuagint, is tohaima testiathekes. And it's that exact same phrase in Greek that occurs in the institution of the Lord's Supper. When Jesus says, this cup is the New Testament in my blood, or this is my blood of the covenant. So when you look at those two stories together, we see that just as Moses placed the blood of the covenant, the blood of forgiveness and atonement directly upon the people of Israel, so Jesus, when he institutes the new covenant, he is giving his blood directly to the people as well, except now he's not sprinkling it upon them externally. Rather, he is giving it to them internally. He's placed it in his cup, and he's bidding his disciples drink from this blood of the covenant so that they might take into themselves this atoning blood, this saving blood, this forgiving blood by which Jesus gives himself to his disciples. But there's more to the story in Exodus chapter 24, because directly after the sacrifice, directly after the sprinkling of the blood, we read that Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 elders of Israel went up on Mount Sinai, and it says they beheld God, and they ate and drank in his presence. All the parts of this story form one unique whole to give us the perspective of what's happening in the upper room. Just as on Sinai they saw God, they ate and drank right after they'd been sprinkled with the blood, so his disciples are in the upper room, and it's here that Jesus gives them his blood of the covenant, and they see God. They see Christ as the Son of God directly in front of them, and in his presence they eat and they drink. So with the giving of the new covenant, we have blood sprinkled upon the people. We have them seeing God and eating and drinking. And in the upper room, in the new covenant, we have them seeing God and eating and drinking. And instead of being sprinkled with blood, we have them drinking Jesus' blood. As he says, this is my blood of the covenant given to you. So Exodus 24 provides us with a rich and a beautiful background to the Lord's Supper. But there's another passage that's also significant for understanding what's happening in the upper room, and that's from Zechariah chapter 9. And this is definitely not a section that we usually go to understand what's happening in the Lord's Supper, but it is very significant. So in Zechariah chapter 9, we have 3 or 4 verses right in a row that provide us with a commentary, a prophetic commentary on what's happening during Holy Week. We've already heard Zechariah in connection with Palm Sunday, because it's in Zechariah 9 that we have the prophecy that the Messiah is going to ride into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. That particular verse is quoted in Matthew's gospel to explain why Jesus rides into Jerusalem. But directly after this particular prophecy in Zechariah chapter 9, we have this verse that says that because of the blood of the covenant that God is giving to his people, he will rescue them out of the waterless pit. Now, this particular phrase, blood of the covenant, is the same phrase that occurred back in Exodus chapter 24 in the Greek translation, same phrase that occurs in the institution of the Lord's Supper in the New Testament. God is saying, because of the blood of my covenant, which I am giving to my people Israel, the blood of the covenant, which is given in the Messiah, the very one who rides into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, because of that blood of the covenant, I'm going to rescue my people out of the waterless pit. Now, this waterless pit in Hebrew is the exact same phrase that we hear back in Genesis when the brothers of Joseph threw him into that waterless pit. Of course, he was pulled out of there, and he eventually made his way to Egypt and became the ruler of Egypt and saved his own family. So in this particular case, in Zechariah chapter 9, we have an allusion to that, in which because of the blood of the Messiah, he is going to pull us up out of the pit. He's going to bring redemption and salvation and new life to us because of the blood which he pours out for us. Now, Exodus chapter 24 and Zechariah chapter 9, as well as all those other Old Testament stories that I mentioned earlier, these all provide us with the background, the Old Testament background for what's happening in the Lord's Supper. It's far more than just a symbolic meal. It's the meal of meals in which all these Old Testament stories come together to provide us with an understanding of what Jesus is doing for us. We have Jesus giving us the blood of the covenant. We have him rescuing us from the waterless pit. We have him putting inside us the blood of atonement and forgiveness that we need so that we might be one with him. And I hope that this has provided you with a little bit deeper and richer understanding of exactly what's happening in the upper room when Jesus gives his disciples this blood of the covenant. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed Maundy Thursday.